The space station cantina was dark and smoky. Strange alien music played softly in the background while creatures from dozens of different worlds sat drinking at small tables. The air smelled of burning fuel and exotic spices that would kill. Most humans. In the far corner, away from the main crowd, sat a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and an insect. Kresh had been sitting alone for 3 hours now. His 4 eyes stared down at his drink, a green liquid that bubbled and hissed in the glass. His thick, scaly skin was covered in scars from old battles. Some were thin lines from energy weapons. Others were jagged tears from claws and teeth. But the worst scars were the ones nobody could see. A group of young aliens at the next table kept looking over at him. They whispered among themselves, pointing and giggling. Kresh knew what they wanted. Every young creature in the galaxy had heard stories about the human war, but few had ever met someone who was actually there. Most veterans were dead. The ones who survived usually kept their mouths shut. "Hey, old-timer," called out a blue-skinned alien with too many arms. "Is it true you fought in the human war?" Kresh didn't look up from his drink. He had been asked this question 1,000 times in cantinas across the galaxy. Usually he just got up and left. But tonight was different. Tonight, the alcohol was making him feel brave. Or maybe just stupid. "Yeah," Kresh said quietly. "I was there." The young aliens at the nearby tables perked up. Word spread quickly through the cantina. Soon most of the bar was listening. Even the bartender, a massive creature with tentacles for arms, stopped cleaning glasses and turned to watch. "Tell us about it," said a small, furry alien with big eyes. "What were the humans like? Were they really as scary as everyone says?" Kresh finally looked up. His 4 eyes were bloodshot and tired. When he spoke, his voice was rough and quiet. Everyone had to lean in to hear him. "You want to know about humans?" he asked. "You really want to know?" The young aliens nodded eagerly. They had grown up hearing whispers about the human war. Their parents and teachers always changed the subject when they asked questions. The official government report said almost nothing. But here was someone who had actually been there. "Fine," Kresh said, taking a long drink. "But don't blame me if you can't sleep tonight." He set down his glass and began to speak. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. 25 years ago, I was a squad leader in the 47th Invasion Fleet. We were part of the biggest military force the galaxy had ever seen. 3,000 ships. 2 million soldiers. We had weapons that could crack planets in half and shields that could stop anything. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the music had stopped. The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for 50 years. They knew everything about the humans. What they ate, how they lived, how they fought. The report said they were primitives. They'd barely had space travel. Their weapons were crude. Their military was small and poorly trained. Kresh paused to take another drink. The green liquid seemed to calm his nerves. "Earth was supposed to be easy," he continued. "A quick victory to show the galaxy that the Council was still in charge. We had conquered 18 worlds in the past 10 years. Most of them surrendered without a fight. The ones that didn't were crushed in a matter of days." A young alien raised his hand. "But Earth was different?" Kresh laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Different? That's like saying a volcano is different from a campfire." He stood up and began to pace. His movement was stiff and awkward, the result of old injuries that had never healed properly. "The first mistake we made was thinking the humans were like us. We thought they would surrender when they saw our ships. We thought they would negotiate. When they realized they couldn't win. We thought they would follow the rules of war that every civilized species follows." Kresh stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. His 4 eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. "Humans don't follow rules. They don't surrender when they should. They don't negotiate when they're beaten. They don't even seem to understand the concept of hopeless odds." The bartender spoke up. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Kresh said, sitting back down, "that when a human is cornered when they have no chance of winning, when any sane creature would give up, they get dangerous. Not scared, not desperate, dangerous. He took another drink and continued. We started with Earth's main colony world, New Terra, 10 million humans living in cities that look like toys compared to our battle stations. They had maybe 100 ships in orbit. We had 3,000. They had planetary defense guns that fired metal slugs. We had plasma cannons that could melt mountains. Kresh's voice grew quieter. Command gave them the standard ultimatum, surrender or die. Most species take the surrender option. It makes sense. Live to fight another day. Protect your people, save your cities, but not the humans. Ask the small furry alien. The human sent back a message, Kresh said. Just 2 words. Come and take it. The cantina was so quiet you could hear the station's life support systems humming. We thought it was just bravado, Kresh continued. Young species always try to act tough at first. But then our scouts started disappearing, not destroyed. Just gone, no wreckage, no distress calls, no nothing. They were there 1 minute and gone the next. He paused, lost in the memory. Then we found the first one. Our fastest scout ship, designed to outrun anything in the galaxy. We found it drifting in space, completely intact. The crew was gone. Not dead, just gone. The ship's computer showed that they had been boarded, but there was no sign of how. No hull breaches, no airlock records, no nothing. The young aliens looked confused. How is that possible? That's what we wondered, Kresh said. So we sent a team to investigate. They found the crew in the cargo hold. They were alive, but they were different. They kept talking about Earth, about how beautiful it was, about how they wanted to go there and live in peace. Kresh's voice dropped to a whisper. The humans had done something to their minds. Changed them somehow, made them want to defect. We had to put them in prison cells to keep them from stealing ships and flying to Earth. The cantina crowd looked skeptical. Mind control was the stuff of bad science fiction movies. You don't believe me, Kresh said. I don't blame you. I didn't believe it either, not until it happened to my own squad. He stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, the stars looked cold and distant. We were on patrol near the edge of the system, routine sweep for human ships. We detected something on sensors. Small craft, probably a scout. We moved in to investigate. Kresh turned back to his audience. The ship was damaged, drifting, no power, no life support. We thought it was abandoned. But when we got close, we picked up a single life sign, a human. He sat back down, his 4 eyes distant. She was young, maybe 20 years old in human terms, injured, barely conscious. She kept asking for help, begging us to save her. She looked so helpless, so innocent. Kresh laughed bitterly. My squad leader wanted to leave her, said it was a trap. But I overruled him. I thought we could interrogate her, maybe learn something useful, so we brought her aboard. The tension in the cantina was thick enough to cut with a knife. She was awake for 3 days. 3 days of questions and medical treatment. She seemed grateful. She told us about Earth, about her family, about how she just wanted the war to end. She was sweet and charming and completely harmless. Kresh's voice hardened. On the 4th day, she killed half my squad. The young aliens gasped. The bartender dropped a glass. How? Someone asked. We still don't know, Kresh said. The security cameras showed nothing. 1 minute she was sleeping in her cell. The next minute 4 of my soldiers were dead. No weapons, no violence, no struggle. They just died. He finished his drink and signaled for another. The human was gone, vanished. The ship's computer showed no record of her leaving. But she was gone and half my squad was dead and I had no idea how or why. The cantina was dead silent. Even the background hum of the station seemed muted. That, Kresh said quietly, was my first real lesson about humans. They're not just dangerous because they're strong or smart or brave. They're dangerous because they're willing to do things that no sane species would even consider. He looked around the cantina at the young, eager faces. And that was just the beginning. Kresh ordered another drink and waited for the bartender to refill his glass. The green liquid bubbled and hissed as it settled. Around him, the cantina remained silent. Every alien in the place was hanging on his words, waiting for him to continue his story. After that first encounter, Kresh said, Command decided we needed to be more careful. No more picking up strays. No more prisoners unless absolutely necessary. We thought we had learned our lesson. He took a sip of his drink and grimaced. The alcohol burned, but it helped him remember things he would rather forget. The main invasion began 6 months later. 3,000 ships dropped out of hyperspace around New Terra. The humans had maybe 100 ships to defend the entire planet. Their biggest warship was smaller than our supply vessels. A young alien with purple skin raised his hand. So you won easily? Kresh laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. We should have. By every law of warfare, every tactical manual, every strategic principle we knew, it should have been over in hours. But humans don't read our manuals. He stood up and walked to the window again. The stars outside looked the same as they had 25 years ago, but Kresh knew better. The galaxy was different now, darker, more dangerous. The human fleet didn't try to fight us ship to ship. They couldn't. We had better weapons, better shields, better everything. Instead, they did something no military commander had ever seen before. Kresh turned back to his audience. They attacked our supply lines. The aliens looked confused. One of them spoke up. That's normal tactics, isn't it? Not the way humans do it, Kresh said. Most species target supply ships, yes. But they try to capture them intact. Supplies are valuable. Ships are expensive. You don't waste resources if you can help it. He sat back down and leaned forward. Humans don't care about waste. They rammed our supply ships with their own vessels. Suicide attacks. Pilots who flew straight into our cargo holds and detonated their engines. They destroyed millions of tons of food, fuel, and ammunition in the first week. The small, furry alien gasped. They killed their own people. They volunteered, Kresh said quietly. That's what made it so terrifying. These weren't desperate soldiers with no choice. They were volunteers. Pilots who lined up for the chance to die killing us. He took another drink. But that was just the beginning. While we were dealing with the suicide attacks, the humans on New Terra were preparing for ground invasion. We expected them to fortify their cities, protect their important buildings, maybe evacuate their civilians to safe areas. Kresh's 4 eyes grew distant. Instead, they started destroying everything themselves. The cantina crowd murmured in confusion. The bartender stopped cleaning glasses and moved closer to listen. I was in the first wave of ground troops, Kresh continued. We landed outside New Terra's capital city expecting to find defensive positions. Military bases, maybe some resistance fighters. Instead we found ruins, he paused, remembering. The humans had blown up their own spaceport, poisoned their own water supply, demolished their own power plants. The city looked like it had been bombed for weeks, but we hadn't fired a single shot at it. A blue-skinned alien with too many arms spoke up. Why would they do that? Because, Kresh said, they wanted to make sure we got nothing. If they couldn't keep their world, they were going to make it worthless to us. He finished his drink and signaled for another. But it was worse than that. The humans didn't just destroy their infrastructure, they turned it into weapons. The young aliens leaned forward, eager to hear more. The spaceport they blew up? They timed the explosion for when our first landing craft touched down. Killed 300 of my soldiers in the first 5 minutes. The water supply they poisoned? They knew we would test it, so they made sure the poison was on a delayed timer. It looked safe for the first few hours. Kresh's voice grew harder. 50 soldiers died drinking that water. 50 good troops who thought they were being careful. He stood up and began pacing again. The worst part was the civilians. In every other war, civilians run away or hide or surrender. They're not combatants. They're just people trying to survive, but human civilians. Kresh stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. Human civilians are just soldiers without uniforms. The cantina was dead silent. We found a school, Kresh continued. A place where human children learned. It had been abandoned for weeks, but we still had to search it. Standard procedure. Make sure no one was hiding inside. He sat back down, his movements slow and tired. The building was empty, clean, no signs of struggle or hasty evacuation. Just empty classrooms with small desks and colorful pictures on the walls. My squad was starting to relax. It looked harmless. Kresh picked up his new drink, but didn't take a sip. Then Private Vex stepped on a child's toy. A small plastic animal that squeaked when you pressed it, except this one didn't squeak. It exploded. The young aliens gasped. Vex lost his leg. The explosion triggered a chain reaction. More toys exploded. Then the walls, then the ceiling. The whole building came down on top of us. Kresh's hands were shaking now. I was the only survivor. Buried under rubble for 6 hours before the rescue team found me. And when they dug me out, I found a note pinned to the wall next to where I was trapped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was old and stained with blood, but the words were still readable. You came to hurt our children. Now you know how it feels to be buried alive. It was signed by someone named Lisa Baker, a human teacher. The cantina crowd stared at the note in horrified silence. A teacher, Kresh repeated. Someone whose job was to take care of children. And she had turned their school into a death trap. He put the note away and took a long drink. That's when I realized we weren't fighting an army, we were fighting an entire species. Every human on that planet was a soldier. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a battlefield. A young alien with silver skin spoke up, but surely the military was different. Professional soldiers are trained to fight fair. Kresh laughed bitterly. Fair? You want to know about fair? 3 weeks. Into the ground invasion, we captured a human military base. Real soldiers this time, not civilians. We expected a proper fight. Defensive positions, covering fire, maybe a negotiated surrender when they realized they were outnumbered. He stood up and walked to the bar, ordering another drink. Instead, we found the base completely empty. No soldiers, no weapons, no equipment. Just empty buildings and silence. My commander thought they had retreated. He ordered us to secure the area and set up our own base there. Kresh returned to his seat with a fresh drink. We spent 2 days turning the human base into our own fortress. Brought in supplies, set up communications, established a perimeter. It was the perfect location. High ground, good visibility, access. To clean water, he paused. On the 3rd night, the humans came back. The cantina crowd held their breath. They didn't attack the base. They didn't try to retake it. Instead, they surrounded us and started broadcasting music. Music? Asked the small, furry alien. Human music? Loud, chaotic, terrible sounds that went on for hours. We thought it was psychological warfare. An attempt to keep us awake and demoralize us. We were wrong. Kresh's voice dropped to a whisper. The music was a signal. While we were focused on the noise, human engineers were digging tunnels under our base. They had been planning this for weeks. The whole evacuation was a trap. He took a shaky sip of his drink. At exactly midnight, they detonated charges in the tunnels. The entire base collapsed into a sinkhole. 3,000 soldiers fell into the earth. Most died instantly. The ones who survived were trapped in the dark with broken bones and no way out. The young aliens stared at him in shock. I was on guard duty at the perimeter when it happened. I watched my friends disappear into the ground. I heard them calling for help. And I couldn't do anything. Kresh finished his drink in one gulp. The humans left speakers around the sinkhole. They played the screams of our dying soldiers for 3 days. Then they broadcast a message from their commander, a woman named Kate Morrison. He closed his 4 eyes, remembering. She said, "You came to our world thinking we would fight like you, but we're not like you. We're willing to do whatever it takes to win. And we're just getting started." The cantina was completely silent. That's when I knew, Kresh said quietly, that we had made a terrible mistake. We weren't conquering a planet. We were waking up a monster. Kresh stared at his empty glass for a long moment. The cantina around him was so quiet that he could hear the hum of the air recyclers and the distant sounds of ships docking at the station. He had told many stories over the years, but this next part always made his stomach turn. The worst part about fighting humans, he said slowly, is that they don't stay dead. The young aliens looked confused. One of them, a creature with green skin and large eyes, spoke up. What do you mean? Everyone dies eventually. Not humans, Kresh said. At least not the way you think. He signaled the bartender for another drink. His hands were shaking more now, and he needed the alcohol to steady his nerves. 2 months into the ground war we thought we were making progress. We had taken several human cities and secured key supply routes. Our casualties were high, but we were winning. Or so we thought. Kresh accepted his fresh drink and took a long sip. That's when we first heard about Sergeant Collins. The name hung in the air like a curse. Even now, 25 years later, saying it out loud made Kresh's skin crawl. Danny Collins was a human demolitions expert. Age 28, born on Earth, served in the Colonial Marines for 6 years. Good soldier, but nothing special. Just, one of thousands of humans defending New Terra. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Our intelligence drones recorded his death in the first week of the invasion. He was defending a supply depot on the outskirts of New Terra City. Plasma Bolt 2? The chest confirmed kill. We even had video footage of him falling. His body was buried under rubble when we bombed the depot. The small, furry alien leaned forward. But he wasn't really dead? Oh, he was dead, Kresh said. We made sure of that. But somehow, he kept killing our soldiers. The cantina crowd exchanged confused glances. 3 weeks after Collins died, our forces started finding his signature everywhere. Explosive devices hidden in ventilation systems. Supply caches rigged to detonate when opened. Communication towers sabotaged with the precision of a trained demolitions expert. Kresh's voice grew quieter. The first incident was at Forward Base 7. A supply convoy had just arrived with food and ammunition. The soldiers were unloading. The trucks when the cargo containers exploded. 50 dead, twice as many wounded. The bomb was built exactly the way Collins used to build them. He took another drink. Command thought it was a coincidence. Maybe another human demolitions expert was copying Collins' techniques. But then it happened again. And again, and again. The blue-skinned alien with too many arms spoke up. Someone was pretending to be him? That's what we thought at first, Kresh said. But then the sightings started. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Soldiers on. Patrol would report seeing a figure in damaged colonial marine armor. Always in the distance, always moving through the shadows. When they went to investigate, they found nothing. But the next day, another base would be destroyed. Kresh turned back to his audience. The psychological effect was worse than the actual attacks. Our soldiers started jumping at shadows. They shot at anything that moved. They refused to go on. Patrol alone. Some of them started having nightmares about a dead man walking through their camps. He sat back down, his movements stiff and painful. I was assigned to a special task force to hunt down this ghost. 50 of our best soldiers equipped with the latest tracking technology. Our mission was simple: find whoever was impersonating Collins and kill them. The young aliens leaned forward, eager to hear more. We spent 3 months chasing shadows. Every time we thought we had him, he disappeared. Every time we found one of his bombs, he was already gone. It was like fighting smoke. Kresh's 4 eyes grew distant. The breakthrough came when we captured a human resistance fighter, a woman named Amy Chun. She was injured and couldn't run, so we managed to take her alive. He paused, remembering. Chun was tough. She wouldn't talk no matter what we did to her, but she kept smiling. Even when we threatened to kill her, she just smiled and said, Collins will get you. He gets everyone eventually. The cantina was dead silent. That's when we realized the truth. There was no one person pretending to be Collins. The entire human resistance had turned him into a symbol. Dozens of fighters had taken his name, wore his uniform, continued his work. Kresh's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was more than that. The humans had created a legend. Every time one of their Collins died, another would take his place. The ghost was real because they made him real. A young alien with silver skin spoke up, but surely you could tell the difference? Different people have different faces, different voices? You would think so, Kresh said. But the humans were smart. They all wore the same damaged helmet. They all carried the same weapons. They all moved the same way. And they all had the same message. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. The metal was scratched and dented, obviously very old. This was found at the site of the last Collins attack, the one that finally broke our task force. Kresh pressed a button on the device. A human voice filled the cantina, speaking in clear, unaccented galactic standard. You came to our world thinking you could break us, but you can't kill an idea. You can't defeat hope. I am Collins. We are all Collins. And we will never stop fighting. The message ended, leaving the cantina in stunned silence. That voice, Kresh said, belonged to a 17-year-old human girl named Sarah Martinez. She had never met the real Collins. She wasn't even a soldier. She was a student who had learned to make bombs from watching instructional videos. He put the recording device away. Martinez died 3 days after she made that recording, killed in a firefight with one of our patrols, but the next week, another Collins appeared. This time it was a 50-year-old man named Robert Kim, a farmer who had never held a weapon before the invasion. The young aliens looked horrified. How many of them were there? Asked the small, furry alien. We never found out, Kresh said. Every time we killed one, 2 more appeared. Every time we thought we had them figured out, they changed their tactics. The ghost of Collins became more dangerous than the real Collins had ever been. He stood up and began pacing again. The psychological warfare was brilliant. They didn't just want to kill us. They wanted to drive us insane, and it worked. Kresh stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. I watched good soldiers crack. Under the pressure, experienced warriors who had fought in a dozen campaigns started having nervous breakdowns. They would wake up screaming about dead men walking through their dreams. He sat back down, his movements slow and tired. The worst part was the uncertainty. We never knew if we were fighting 1 person or 100. We never knew if Collins was real or just a legend. The humans had weaponized our own fear and used it against us. The bartender, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. How? Did it end? Kresh laughed bitterly. It didn't end. That's the point. Even now, 25 years later, I still have nightmares about Collins. I still jump when I hear footsteps behind me. I still check the shadows when I walk alone. He took a long drink. The human resistance used our own intelligence against us. They knew we would try to understand Collins, to categorize him, to find patterns in his behavior. So they made him unpredictable. They made him into something we couldn't fight because we couldn't understand him. The young alien sat in stunned silence. But the real genius, Kresh continued, was that they made us afraid of a dead man. Collins was already gone, but his ghost was immortal. Every human who picked up a bomb and said his name became Collins. Every attack carried out in his memory made the legend stronger. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a heavy thud. We weren't fighting a person anymore. We were fighting an idea. And you can't kill an idea with plasma rifles and orbital bombardments. The cantina remained silent for a long moment. That, Kresh said quietly, is when I realized that humans don't just fight wars. They fight for things bigger than themselves. They fight for ideas that live on after they die. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. He looked around at the young, frightened faces surrounding him, because how do you defeat someone who's already dead? How do you kill a ghost that exists in the minds of everyone who refuses to surrender? The questions hung in the air like a challenge, unanswered and unanswerable. Kresh ordered another drink, though his hands were shaking so badly now that he could barely hold the glass. The story of Collins had drained him, but he knew the worst was yet to come. The next part of his tale would test the limits of what his audience could believe. If you think Collins was bad, he said quietly, then you're not ready to hear about Captain Rodriguez. The young aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had already heard enough horror stories to fill their nightmares for years, but something in Kresh's voice told them this would be different. Elena Rodriguez was a human engineer, Kresh continued. 34 years old, born on New Terra. She had spent her whole life building things, bridges, buildings, water treatment plants. She was what humans call a creator, not a destroyer. He took a sip of his drink and winced. Until the invasion started, then she became something else entirely. The small furry alien spoke up. What happened to her? We captured her, Kresh said simply. 4th month of the siege. She was trying to sabotage one of our supply depots. My squad found her with a bag full of explosives and plans to blow up our ammunition storage. He paused, remembering. Rodriguez didn't run when she saw us coming. She didn't fight. She just stood there with her hands up, smiling, like she wanted to be caught. The blue-skinned alien with too many arms leaned forward. That's strange behavior for a saboteur. We thought so too, Kresh said. Standard procedure was to interrogate prisoners and then execute them publicly. The executions were meant to scare other humans into surrendering. They never worked, but Command kept ordering them anyway. He stood up and walked to the window. Again, outside, ships moved like fireflies through the darkness of space. Rodriguez was different from other prisoners. She was calm, polite, even helpful. She answered our questions without being tortured. She told us about human defensive positions, supply routes, even the names of resistance leaders. Kresh turned back to his audience. The information she gave us was accurate. We used it to capture 3 resistance cells and destroy a major weapons cache. Command was impressed. They thought we had finally broken a human prisoner. The young aliens looked confused. But it was a trap? Asked the one with purple skin. The biggest trap in the history of warfare, Kresh said. But not the kind you think. He sat back down and leaned forward. Rodriguez had volunteered to be captured. She had planned the whole thing. The sabotage attempt, the arrest, even the information she gave us, all of it was designed to get her into our main command center. The cantina was silent except for the hum of life support systems. During her interrogation, Rodriguez memorized everything. The layout of the building, the security protocols, the shift patterns of the guards. But more than that, she planted something. Kresh's voice dropped to a whisper. She had infected herself with a virus, the young aliens gasped. The bartender dropped a glass and it shattered on the floor. Not a computer virus, Kresh continued. A biological one. Something the humans had engineered specifically for our species. He took a shaky sip of his drink. The virus was designed to be undetectable by our medical scanners. It looked like normal human bacteria, harmless, but it was programmed to activate when exposed to specific chemicals. A young alien with silver skin spoke up. What kind of chemicals? The ones our species produces when we're stressed or afraid, Kresh said. Pheromones that every Vortakian releases during interrogation sessions. The horrible implications of what he was saying began to sink in. Rodriguez knew she would be tortured. She knew we would release those pheromones during her interrogation. And she knew the virus would activate when that happened. Kresh's 4 eyes were distant now, lost in the memory. The virus didn't harm her. It was designed to be harmless to human physiology. But to us, ... He trailed off. What did it do? Asked the small, furry alien. It attacked our nervous systems, Kresh said. Caused paralysis first, then organ failure. But it was slow, took hours to kill. Long enough for the victim to understand what was happening. He finished his drink in one gulp. Within 6 hours of Rodriguez's interrogation, the entire command staff of the invasion force was dead or dying. 50 of our best officers, including the Supreme Commander himself. The cantina crowd stared at him in horror. But Rodriguez didn't stop there. Before the virus killed her, she had one more message to deliver. Kresh reached into his jacket and pulled out another recording device. This one was newer than the Collins recording, but just as scratched and dented. She broadcast this message to our entire fleet. Every ship, every soldier, every officer still alive. He pressed the button. A woman's voice filled the cantina, speaking in accented but clear galactic standard. She sounded tired but determined. You came to our world thinking we were weak, thinking we would surrender when faced with superior force. But you don't understand what you're fighting. The voice paused, and they could hear labored breathing. You're not fighting an army or a government or a military. You're fighting a family. And when you threaten our family, we become something you've never seen before. Another pause. The breathing was getting worse. I am Captain Elena Rodriguez of the New Terra Colonial Engineering Corps. I have given my life to protect my home and my people, but my death is not the end. It's a warning. The voice grew stronger, more intense. We will use our own bodies as weapons if we have to. We will turn ourselves into biological bombs, psychological warfare, walking nightmares. There is no line we won't cross, no sacrifice we won't make, no price we won't pay. A long pause. When the voice returned, it was barely a whisper. Tell your leaders that humanity is not like other species. We don't surrender. We don't negotiate with invaders. We adapt, we evolve, we become whatever we need to become to survive. The final words were spoken with effort, as if each syllable was a struggle. And if you stay on our world, you will discover that the only thing more dangerous than a living human is a human with nothing left to lose. The recording ended. The cantina was dead silent. Kresh put the device away with trembling hands. Rodriguez died 30 seconds after that transmission ended. But her message spread through our fleet like wildfire. Within hours, soldiers were requesting transfers. Within days, entire units were reporting sick. He signaled for another drink. The psychological impact was devastating. Our troops were no longer afraid of human weapons or tactics. They were afraid of the humans themselves. Afraid that any prisoner, any civilian, any contact with a human might be a death sentence. The young aliens looked sick. One of them, the purple-skinned one, spoke up. How many died from the virus? 53 in the first wave, Kresh said. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. He accepted his fresh drink and took a long sip. Rodriguez had planned for that too. The virus she used was just a prototype. Her message included detailed instructions for making more, instructions that every human on New Terra received. The bartender spoke up. They made more biological weapons? Worse, Kresh said. They started volunteering to be captured. Human civilians would walk up to our patrols and surrender. Peaceful, cooperative, helpful. And every single one was a potential biological weapon. He stood up and began pacing again. We couldn't trust any human contact after that. Medical examinations became mandatory for any prisoner. But the humans adapted. They created viruses that couldn't be detected. Toxins that activated days later. Parasites that lay dormant for weeks. Kresh stopped pacing and faced his audience. Rodriguez had turned the human population into a biological weapons factory. Every man, woman, and child on New Terra became a potential carrier of death. The young aliens sat in stunned silence. The invasion became impossible, Kresh continued. We couldn't interrogate prisoners because they might be infected. We couldn't accept surrenders because they might be traps. We couldn't even provide medical aid to wounded humans because they might contaminate our doctors. He sat back down heavily. Rodriguez had weaponized human biology itself. She had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. The small, furry alien spoke in a tiny voice. How did you survive? Luck, Kresh said simply. I was on patrol when the virus hit command. By the time I got back to base, everyone was dead. I found Rodriguez's body in her cell, still smiling. He took another drink, but she left one more surprise. A note, written in her own blood, pinned to the wall of her cell. Kresh's voice grew quiet. It said, "This is what happens when you invade our home. We become the disease that kills you from the inside. Sweet dreams." The cantina remained silent for a long moment. That's when I knew, Kresh said finally, that we weren't fighting a war anymore. We were fighting evolution itself. The humans were adapting faster than we could counter them. They were becoming something new, something designed specifically to kill us. He looked around at the terrified faces of his audience. And the worst part was, they were enjoying it. Kresh sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his empty glass. The cantina around him was so quiet that even the background music had stopped. Every alien in the place was waiting for him to continue, but he seemed lost in memories too. Terrible to share. Finally, the small, furry alien spoke up. What happened next? Did you retreat? Kresh looked up, his four eyes focusing slowly on his audience. Retreat? No, we didn't retreat. You retreat when you're losing a battle. You retreat when you need to regroup and try again later. He signaled for another drink, though his movements were slow and unsteady. What we did was run, like animals fleeing a forest fire, like prey escaping a predator. We ran because we finally understood what we were really fighting. The bartender brought him a fresh glass, but Kresh didn't touch it. By the 6th month of the siege, we had lost 60% of our ground forces. Not to superior weapons or tactics, but to fear. Our soldiers were having nervous breakdowns. Some were refusing orders. Others were shooting themselves rather than face another day on New Terra. He picked up his drink but set it down without taking a sip. Command tried everything. They brought in fresh troops from other campaigns. They increased pay and promised promotions. They even tried executing soldiers for cowardice. Nothing worked. The young aliens leaned forward, eager to hear the conclusion of the story. That's when the humans launched their counterattack. Kresh's voice was barely above a whisper now. We thought we knew where their fleet was hiding. Our sensors had tracked them to the asteroid belt at the edge of the system. A few dozen ships, maybe 50 at most. We weren't worried. Even reduced by losses, we still had over 2,000 vessels. He finally took a sip of his drink. The human ships looked like garbage. Converted cargo vessels, modified civilian craft, even old mining equipment welded together with weapons bolted on the sides. They should have been easy targets. A young alien with green skin spoke up, but they weren't? No, Kresh said. They weren't easy targets at all. Because the humans weren't trying to fight us ship to ship. They were trying to kill us. The distinction seemed to confuse the young aliens, but the older patrons in the cantina nodded grimly. They understood the difference between fighting and killing. The human fleet came out of the asteroid belt like a swarm of angry insects. No formation, no coordination, no strategy that we could recognize. Just pure, focused violence. Kresh stood up and walked to the window once more. Their lead ship was commanded by someone called Admiral Jake Mitchell. He broadcast a message to our entire fleet as his ships approached. He turned back to his audience. Mitchell looked like he had been in 100 battles. His face was scarred. His uniform was torn and his left arm was in a sling. But his voice was calm and steady when he spoke. Kresh closed his four eyes, remembering. He said, "You came to our worlds thinking we were weak. Now you know better. You've seen what happens. When you threaten our families, our homes, our children, you've learned that humans don't surrender." The cantina was completely silent. Then Mitchell smiled. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. He said, "Now we're going to teach you what happens when you make us angry." Kresh opened his eyes and looked directly at his audience. The human ships didn't try to disable our vessels or capture them intact. They rammed our battle cruisers with unmanned cargo ships packed with explosives. They targeted our life support systems instead of our weapons. They broadcast surrender offers and then attacked during the ceasefire negotiations. He sat back down heavily. But the worst part was the crews. When we boarded damaged human ships, we found that the pilots had chained themselves to their controls. They couldn't abandon ship even if they wanted to. They were committed to fighting until they died. The blue-skinned alien with too many arms spoke up. "That's madness." "Yes," Kresh said simply. It was madness, but it was effective madness. He took a long drink. Our fleet broke apart in 6 hours. Not because the humans had better weapons or superior numbers, but because our crews couldn't handle the psychological pressure. They had never fought an enemy that was genuinely trying to kill them all. The young aliens looked confused. Most Wars in the galaxy are about territory or resources, Kresh explained. You fight until one side gives up, then you negotiate terms. Prisoners are exchanged, territories are divided, life goes on. But humans don't fight that kind of war, he leaned forward. Humans fight extinction wars, total wars. Wars where the only acceptable outcome is the complete destruction of the enemy. And when you're fighting someone who would rather die than lose, you can't win through conventional means. The cantina crowd shifted uncomfortably. The retreat began when Admiral Mitchell's ship rammed our command vessel. His entire bridge crew died in the collision, but they took out our fleet commander and half the senior staff. After that, our remaining ships started jumping to hyperspace without orders. Kresh's voice grew bitter. I was on one of the last ships to leave New Terra as we prepared to jump. Mitchell broadcast one final message to our fleet. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a third recording device. This one was different from the others, newer and in better condition. I've kept this for 25 years. Command ordered all copies destroyed, but I saved one. I needed to remember. He pressed the button. A man's voice filled the cantina, speaking in clear, unaccented galactic standard. The voice was tired, but determined, filled with barely controlled rage. You came to our world 3 billion strong. You had ships that could crack planets and weapons that could boil oceans. You thought that made you powerful. The voice paused. But power isn't about the size of your fleet or the strength of your weapons. Power is about will, about determination, about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what you love. Another pause. You invaded our home. You killed our families. You threatened our children. And now you're running away because you finally understand what you're really fighting. The voice grew harder, more intense. You're not fighting humans. You're fighting humanity itself. You're fighting every parent who would die to protect their child. Every soldier who would sacrifice themselves for their comrades. Every civilian who would rather burn their own world than let you have it. A long pause. When the voice returned, it was cold and final. Tell your council that humanity remembers. Tell them that we know where you come from. Tell them that we will find you if you ever threaten us again. The final words were spoken with quiet certainty. And tell them that the next time we meet, we won't be defending, we'll be hunting. The recording ended. The cantina was dead silent. Kresh put the device away with shaking hands. That message was broadcast to every ship in our fleet. Every survivor heard it. Every one of us carried it home. He finished his drink and stood up slowly. The Galactic Council classified the entire human war as a strategic withdrawal. They told the public that human space wasn't worth the cost of conquest. They said the resources we would gain weren't worth the lives we would lose. Kresh walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back to his audience one final time. But those of us who were there know the truth. We didn't withdraw because it was too expensive. We didn't retreat because the humans had better weapons. We ran because we were afraid. The young aliens stared at him in stunned silence. The humans are still out there, Kresh said quietly. Somewhere beyond the neutral zone, building ships and training soldiers, waiting for someone to be stupid enough to threaten them again. He paused at the door. 25 years ago, we thought we were conquering primitives. Instead, we woke up the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. And now that predator knows. We exist. Kresh opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Sleep well, he said over his shoulder, and pray that humans never learn where you live. The door closed behind him, leaving the cantina in absolute silence. The young aliens sat frozen in their seats, processing the implications of what they had heard. The older patrons finished their drinks quickly and left without speaking. Within an hour, the cantina was empty except for the bartender who stood, alone cleaning glasses and wondering if he should start looking for a new job on a station farther from human space. Outside the window, the stars looked different now, colder, more dangerous, and somewhere among them, humanity was waiting.